join us today for Behavioural Science Club. We're just about to tick over to 4 o'clock, so I'll just give you all time to sign in. Put yourselves on mute. If you have the bandwidth to have your camera on, please do, because we love to see your smiling faces. And as we kick over to 4 o'clock, I would like today to introduce our guest, and our guest is Fatima Koaik. And Fatima is going to be telling us what is the latest in the Arab world in the field of behavioural scientists. She was among the first behavioural scientists in what some people call the MENA, Middle East and North America region. She is a graduate from London School of Economics in behavioural science and has led various government projects at the United Nations Development Programme. This is not small fry, is it, Fatima? She was involved in establishing the Government Behavioural Science Unit in Kuwait, and she provided advisory work to Nudge Lebanon. So it's a lot of firsts. It's a lot of new stuff to us, which is fantastically exciting. And Fatima is going to show us how social expectations and social norms influence moral self-image, and just basically how behavioural science is transforming the Arab world. So Fatima, you are very welcome. Please join us, and let's just kick off by asking you, Fatima, how you came into the subject of behavioural science.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you. Thank you, Prakash, for inviting me to the Behavioral Science Club. It's just an honor for me to be part of your speakers. I know I'm number 53, and I think, yeah. So I'm also very happy to be part of this event today.
Sorry, Fatima, I think somebody needs to put themselves on mute. If you can just all check you're on mute, please. Carry on, Fatima.
Thank you. So yeah, as you said, I graduated from London School of Economics and Masters in Behavioral Science. I was in the second cohort to graduate in Behavioral Science in 2016. And back then, this new field of Behavioral Science was very new. And I was happy to bring it back to the region and start several interesting projects on this. Now I'm a PhD candidate also at London School of Economics, working on my PhD. And on social norm and social expectations. I've also worked for the past 10 years in international organizations for United Nations Development Program, the IMF before, and now I'm a short-term consultant at the IMBAD team with the World Bank. How I came to behavioral science, so I was always interested in psychology and in industry organizational psychology in specific. And when I applied to LSE, I didn't know, to be honest, that that field will grow that big. And I remember the first day I attended the first lecture, I sat down and I heard a lot of tweets and a lot of messages that President Obama announced the establishment of SBST. And then this is when I knew that I'm in the right place and this is not just another master's. So I'm very happy to be here today again. And let's just start with the presentation. So today I will, first, can you see the screen? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the presentation will have, the talk will have two folds. The first one, I want to walk you through on how behavioral insights came to the Arab world and what are the latest events or latest projects happening here. And then the next part would be about my own research that I've been working on at LSE on expectation or exception. How does social norm and social expectation affect our moral self-image and then subsequent behavioral spillover? For those of you who are not really familiar with behavioral spillover, I hope you will do by the end of the lecture, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your feedback. Let's start with behavioral insights and the Arab world. So as for just a quick refresher for those of you who are new to the field, I know all of you are behavioral scientists or they know about behavioral science, but for those who are new, behavioral science is a new field where we really look at how we are basically predictably irrational, all of us as human beings. And we start by looking at the classical standard economic theory and the assumption that people are always rational and they always make optimal decisions regardless of the context they're in. And then behavioral economics is here to just try to tell us that, wait, let's apply psychological insight and psychology and try to really understand how people actually make decisions, not hypothetically based on these assumptions of rationality. And more we're seeing the application of behavioral economics into public policy, and specific into governments, just to inform the way policies are made. And here I want to emphasize that behavioral economics is just not about understanding or changing human behavior, but a big part of it is evidence-based policies. And I come from my previous experience at the UNDP was to support the government of Kuwait establishing a Kuwait Public Policy Center. And I know that more and more governments are moving towards evidence-based policies where we run randomized control trials on actual human beings to make rational decisions. Here, I want to move into how it came to the region. So behavioral insights gained a huge momentum in the world in the past decade. And you all know how really the world exploded since 2011 when the first nudge unit was established in the UK. And since then, I like this. I know a lot of you are familiar with this graph, but I like it because it shows the map of all the nudge units inside the governments, outside the governments, but also in multinational organizations. And if we zoom in into the Arab world, we can see that this map was taken maybe in 2018 or 2017 by OECD, but since then the list has been growing and growing. But it's all started in Qatar. So the first nudge unit in the Arab world was in Qatar. So QBIU, formerly known as QBIU, was established in 2016. Then what followed by Nudge Lebanon, then GSSPD KPAL was done in Kuwait. And now we can see more and more.
I don't interrupt. Yeah, we're not able to see your presentation. Maybe you want to take it full screen and then move the slides or reshare your screen.
I can see. So
yeah, now we can see the slide 5. Yeah.
This is better.
This is better. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just remove this. Okay. So here next, I want to just walk you through, this slide is not comprehensive, so might be missing some of the institutional behavioral insights unit and some of the governments, but I wanted to show you the main ones. So B4 Development, formerly known as the Qatar Behavioral Insights Unit, was the first nudge unit in the Middle East. It started in it was founded in 2016 at the Supreme Committee for Legacy and Development and Delivery and for the FIFA World Cup. And now they've worked on more than 70 experiments in different policy areas. The second unit was Nudge Lebanon, and it's an NGO, and it was the first NGO in the Middle East to apply behavioral insights. It started in 2017, and since then they've been spearheading a number of projects regionally on different also policy areas. The third one is in Kuwait, where I'm tuning in now, and it's the Kuwait Policy Appraisal Lab. It's the second behavioral insights unit in the GCC, was established as part of the Kuwait Public Policy Center. And then in Saudi Arabia, we're seeing more and more applications. The latest is the Health Nudge Unit at the Ministry of Health. And I can also speak about Bahrain Innovation Lab, which I was also supporting as part of UNDP, where they're applying innovation into policy areas and experimentation. And part of it is also behavioral insights. Academia is also taking part of behavioral insights, where in Abu Dhabi, in Sayad, has launched an RCT lab as part of its campus to also use randomized field experiments. Also in Egypt, we have the American University of Cairo, who has its own also RCT lab. But apart from institutional setups, behavioral insight has been widely used in various policy areas, various projects, from health, rule of law, environment, labor market, gender issues, gender-based violence, entrepreneurship, just to name a few. So it doesn't always need to be an institutional nudge unit in a government. Sometimes it's just projects with private sector companies, consultants, or even UN organizations. We've seen a lot of implementation on the vaccine program by UNICEF, Nudge Lebanon, Lebanon, a big program by Beh for Development and Nudge Lebanon, and their pioneer in it is prevention of violence and extremism in Sudan and Yemen. And this was also like the first application of BI into this area, and it's also started in this region. UNDP, a regional office, have been working with BIT on fostering youth entrepreneurship in different Arab states. World Bank have also different projects in Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. A very nice project that also I'm interested in is to identify barriers to female labor participation. This is where they looked at it from a gender and social norm perspective. In Egypt, a lot of work is also being done on women and violence. Kuwait, we have done several experiments on pro-environmental behavior and so on and so forth. This is just to give you a view of what has been happening in the region so far. The next, I want to just show you the first RCT that took place in Lebanon. So this was the first randomized control trial or behavior experiment in the region. It was done in 2016 by Nudge Lebanon, and I was also part of it. And the idea that back then was to increase government revenues through the collection of electricity bills. And we chose a governorate in Lebanon called Saida. And it's a big city, and we went there and we tried to do a randomized control trial, and we had 4 different groups. The first one was the control group. They received the original slip just to ask them to pay their electricity bills. And here, let me just explain one thing. So people usually pay their bills within the 40 days period. So 90% of them, they pay within 40 days, but this requires the collector to really go 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 times, which is increase the cost on the government and sometimes leads to no payment. So the idea here was to try to intervene and see what would work. We tried hassle factor and loss aversion, telling them, okay, if you don't pay your electricity bills on time, then you will create a big hassle for you to really stand in the queue the next day, pay extra financial fees and so forth. So just to try to see whether or not this would work. The third one was social norms, so just telling them that more than 90% of your neighborhood pay their bills on time. And I personally thought that this would work because it also worked in different contexts before. The fourth one is ego. So we put the national flag, as you see, and then we try to tell them your country needs you, be a good citizen, pay your bills on time. And the results, all the treatment groups outperformed the control group, but the ego one, the last one, priming national identity, really increased it by 15 percentage point. And this was the first big RCT done in Lebanon. And then after that, they have done several things to try to work on different areas. Another example is also in Kuwait. Once we established KPAL, we've done some experiments on pro-environmental behavior. One of it is to reduce littering in cinemas. And what we did here was quite using salience nudges. So we randomized the halls in a big cinema. One of them was controlled. The others were provided a video at the beginning of the lecture and of the movie lecture. And the third one, stickers at the back of the seats. And as you can see, it decreased littering and increased trash in the trash bin by 20 percentage point. The same experiment also was done in Qatar, but for the FIFA Club World Cup. This was a recent experiment they did, and it reduced littering by 18% by just putting stickers, wait, please don't leave your waste behind. Just to give you an overview of what's been happening around in behavioral experiments. Another flagship event or a flagship summit that takes place in the region is BX Arabia. So it's organized by Nudge Lebanon and Beh for Development. It's hosted annually, and it's not only a regional event. They bring international speakers like Cass Sunstein, the co-author of Nudge book, and other renowned speakers and experts in behavioral economics. The upcoming one is on the 9th of November. And I encourage everyone to attend so that you could hear more from the region and what's happening on different fronts. Apart from experiments, we've seen in the region a lot of guidance knowledge products from the World Bank, from Beh for Development, Nudge Lebanon, even UNDP worked on youth and entrepreneurship guidance note, violence and extremism prevention. So there's a lot of knowledge product out there to showcase the work, behavioral diagnostic work, not only behavioral experiments that was done. Now to move into my second part of the talk today, and this is even more exciting for me because I would be showing you what I've been working on for the past year or so. So my research topic, I'm interested in social expectation, and it all started because of my background at UNDP. And when I've worked for UNDP for the past maybe 8 years, and a lot of our work was to work on these big sustainable development goals, the SDGs. And these goals are all about achieving sustainability, reducing corruption, improving diversity, inclusion, and all of these goals. And I started looking at a common denominator. And one thing I've looked at is the collectiveness of these goals. So if you want to achieve a green environment, if you want to reduce corruption, if you want really people to be inclusive, then you need to, if you want even COVID-19 have taught us about cooperation and how to be really, how to have a collective behavior, is to cooperate within each other, and each one of us should recycle for us to achieve a green environment. Starting from there, I was interested to see why would people not have a sustainable behavior. So if us as a behavioral scientists, we're trying to nudge people to recycle more. Okay, I can increase recycling by 15%, but guess what? Maybe this would not be sustainable. And we've read a lot about sustainability of those nudges in the literature. So I'm interested in the behavioral spillover. How does one behavior leads to subsequent decisions in behavior 2 or behavior 3? And here I started looking at how I perceive my own behavior and how expectation and exception could affect that. And we will discuss it in more detail in a bit. I'll start with, but here I think I can you see the screen, Prakash, now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So if I will start with a very simple example, standing in the queue. Imagine you're one of these people standing around the counter to buy your ticket. Ask if we were in one room now on Zoom and I ask you, how would you feel about you standing there? I bet you would feel normal, like you're maybe a little bit frustrated, but you should feel normal to wait for your ticket. Imagine one of them would break the queue or break the line and try to go and get in the queue first. What would he feel? I bet all of you would say maybe anxious, ashamed, distressed, and so forth. Let's go to another setup where there's no queue. People are maybe trying to stand in a queue, but it's not working. So how would a person who's trying to stand in a queue feel, like trying really to hold the line if possible? I bet he would be feeling more moral or better about him, feel ashamed or guilty doing so. Let's go to another example. Imagine you decide to go and buy a car, and when you reach to the dealership room, you find an option to buy an electric car, and you decide to make the decision to buy a pro-environmental car. How would you feel about this behavior? I bet you would leave the room and then feel proud, pretty enthusiastic, really you did something for the planet Earth. Maybe you would post it on social media, you will get a warm glow effect, right? But imagine you walk into the same showroom and you decide to opt for a conventional car, which perhaps could be the norm where you live. And then if I ask you, do you feel any distress? Do you feel ashamed? Do you feel guilty doing so? I bet that a minority would feel so. So the difference in how I perceive my action is what I'm interested in. And I'll show you more the theoretical framework in a couple of slides. So it seems rational and logic that acting in a positive, collective, cooperative way, so being a pro-environmental person, paying your taxes on time, taking the COVID vaccine, perhaps wearing your mask. So all of these cooperative actions, not accepting bribery, leads to positive self-perception. So really feel good about yourself. And it improves your moral self-image. By moral self-image is how you perceive your own moral self-record, whether or not you are a moral person. So it's just your own self-perception. I'm not talking about what other people perceive you. It might get affected, but I mean...
Sorry, Fatima, just to interrupt. We're on the standing in queue slide at the moment.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
So you were supposed to see the...
We're seeing the car one now. Yep.
Okay, so when I was like asking you about the cards, you were supposed to see this, but now I'm here. Okay, so
we can see rational and logical. Great,
okay.
thanks.
So if we go to the standard economic theory, we can say that it seems very rational and logical that acting in a positive, collective, cooperative way leads to positive self-perception, but acting in an individualistic maybe, but negative, so accepting a bribe, not paying your taxes on time, perhaps not being environmentally friendly person, wasting food, and so forth, leads to negative self-perception. So it seems logical when we put these two assumptions together, and they seem very rational, and they lead to decreased moral self-image. But what we learned from behavioral science, again, that we need to challenge these assumptions, and some of them are not based on pure rational or logical way. So being predictably irrational, our behavior is driven by different contextual cues. So by who are we with, so the messenger, the people around us, the salience, the sound, the air, the image. So, you know, the context, the choice architecture within which you make decisions would affect the way you perceive your actions, when and where it's happening. And lastly, the social environment. So which behavior is expected and what's the norm? And I'm particularly interested in this. I'm particularly interested to zoom into social expectation. Why? So my first research question is, how do expectation and social norms shape how we feel and perceive our actions? The way behavioral science have presented social norm is a tool. So if we read the literature, social norm is presented as a tool to change behavior. So we use social norm like the RCT done in SIDA on the paying electricity bills. We use it as a tool to nudge people to pay their bills on time. I'm interested to look at it from a perspective of separate variables. So how does my social expectation of what is expected from me from my social environment shape how I feel and perceive my action? So if I expect other people to stand in line, and they expect me to stand in line, and they approve of this behavior, and I'm standing in line because of this social expectation, then I would feel differently about my action. And this is what I'm putting on the table as a research question. Why is this interesting? It's interesting because I believe these self-evaluation and self-perception would drive subsequent behaviors. So if I feel that I'm a very good citizen and I recycle today and I'm not expected to recycle, that maybe it would lead to moral licensing, to me feeling it's okay to transgress and maybe litter or not donate to environmental NGO, or doing a negative behavior subsequently. So I believe that the starting point is to evaluate or measure our self-perception of our action and how it's affecting our moral self-image. And then we would be able to answer, when do people act consistently? So are we consistent with our past behavior, or we act in an opposite way? So, and this is where behavioral spillover kick in. So let me just walk you through in very brief what are behavioral spillovers. It's like ripples on a pond, and this is how Paul Dolan and Matteo Galizzi present them. They say no behavior sits in a vacuum. So we're trying to change one behavior, trying to make people eat healthy. We try to nudge people to pay their taxes, to recycle. But guess what? No behavior sits in a vacuum. And one behavior can greatly affect what happens next. It's like a ripple on a pond. And then it's just mapping these ripples. And this is what Daniel Kahneman say in his book. The mapping of these ripples is now one of the most exciting pursuits in behavioral research. And this is where we can reach a sustainable behavioral change. Otherwise, we would be just looking at one behavior at a time and not seeing the big picture. So that's where it all started. So how can we really measure those behavioral spillovers and make sure we're accounting for them? And just to give you a very brief example on behavioral spillovers, take, for example, the first behavior. Imagine I'm here, you work out after work, you go to the gym. You can do two things subsequently. So the second behavior could take two shapes. You could eat healthy, you could eat unhealthy. If you're eating healthy, it means you're promoting. It's a promoting spillover. So I worked hard, let's keep up the good work. The second option, the second decision I could take is eat unhealthy. And this is called permitting spillover. And could be one type of permitting spillover is moral licensing. I worked hard, I deserve a big slice of cake. I get a license, so I'm balancing, I'm not being consistent. Let's say I do another behavior, I'm here. So the first behavior, I sat all day after work, I didn't go to the gym. I could do two things. I could eat healthy and also eat unhealthy. If I eat healthy, it means I'm purging. It means I'm trying to balance, right? I didn't go to the gym, I better eat healthy. And if I just lose it, I say, what the heck, let's just have a big slice of cake. It means I have a promoting negative spillover. So it means I didn't go to the gym and I'm gonna eat unhealthy. So this is what behavioral spillover looks like. And I'm particularly interested on how I behave in the second behavior after behaving in the first one. And when do I stay consistent and when do I balance or transgress? Now let me move to my framework. So this is what I'm coming up with, and this is my hypothesis. So how expectation on the left-hand side, I have the expectation. So this is a collective behavior. This is a positive behavior that is expected from me from my social environment. By expectation, I mean it's a social norm. And by social norm, I mean I expect other people to do it. So it's a descriptive norm. I expect other people to stand in the queue. And they expect me also to stand in the queue. And I expect them, there's a normative expectation that they approve of standing in the queue. So it's similar to injunctive norms. So they approve of the idea of standing in the queue. So it's the right thing to do. It's not a bad behavior. And then I have two options. Either I want to conform to the expectation, so I'm standing in the queue, so I'm here, or I don't stand in the queue, right? So I'm not conforming to the expectation. My hypothesis says that if I conform to the expectation, I will feel neutral. My moral self-image will not change because I'm just doing what is expected from me. But not conforming to the expectation, breaking the line, would lead to really negative effect on my emotions and my moral self-image. So I would maybe feel more ashamed, guilty, and not good by myself. When we go to the right-hand side, I differentiate between exception and expectation. And here, this is the unexpected behavior. This is a good behavior. It is the injunctive norm. So it is known that it is the right thing to do. But guess what? No one does it. So it is not. And this is where I put the electric car, because I find it a good example and on the other extreme of the spectrum, where it is a good behavior and everybody agrees that getting electric car might be pro-environmental options at a good cost, but it is not really common. Engaging in it would lead to positive effect, positive emotions, and a good moral self-image. But guess what? Not engaging with it, obviously, all of you might know the answer, would lead to nothing. Like I will not even feel bad about myself. And the paradox in my perception of the behavior of a same positive behavior is of an interest because it would affect subsequent actions. So in order to measure or to test out this framework, I started by running a very small online experiment on mTurk. I recruited 416 participants. 53% of them were from the United States, 37% were from India, and 10% from other countries. We randomized them first into two conditions. And the first one, I measured social expectation on standing in the queue. So I wanted to see within their own social network what they expect other people to do and whether they expect other people to approve of standing in the queue, whether it is the right behavior and what they believe. They believe it is like their personal norm. And then here I asked the same question, but for the electric car. And then once I did this, I randomized them again into two conditions. And very simple. The first one, I asked them to imagine. So I gave them a scenario, like hypothetical vignette story. They are in a coffee shop, and then they're waiting in line for their coffee, and they're imagining themselves waiting in line. The second one, the same story, but they should imagine themselves breaking the line. And then here, a story of them going to buy a car and then imagining themselves buying an electric car, and here imagining themselves buying a non-electric car, a conventional car. Then I measure moral self-image and I measure emotions on a scale of 10 emotions, including feeling guilty, feeling distressed, feeling proud, feeling enthusiastic, and so forth. The results were very positive, positive in terms of proving my hypotheses, especially on the emotions side, and we will see more. First, on the social expectation, and this is, if I was able to share, like put it on full screen, you could maybe see it in a nice format, but now maybe you would see all the numbers together, but I'll try to make it as simple as it is. So when asking people their likelihood of engaging in the behavior, whether or not they would really consider buying an electric car, 3.2 was the average of people answered from 1 to 5. And asking them if whether or not they stand in the queue was obviously higher, 4.27. The empirical expectation is the interesting part. So whether they expect others to do the behavior, here, obviously it's not the norm. So only 25% would buy an electric car, and here 70%. So the difference here is what I need for my model to be proven, so I can show that this is an expected and this is an expected and this is an exception. When asked about their personal normative belief, whether or not they approve, they think it's the right thing to do, people approve of the electric car more than standing in the queue. But guess what? They stand in the queue more than they buy an electric car, maybe for cost reasons, or maybe obviously, but in the United States nowadays, you would find good price for electric cars. But I think here the what's driving this is really expectation, because they expect others to stand in line. And when asked about the normative expectation, so normative expectation is other people's personal normative belief. So as if I'm asking a second order personal. So I'm asking, do you expect other people to approve of these behaviors? Then they thought that more people approved of standing in the queue, but they approved more of the electric cars. So I don't know if you could see the paradox, but I thought that this is also quite interesting. So themselves, they approve more of the electric car, but they expect others to approve more of standing in the queue. And this is why the norm is going more into this direction. Another interesting finding is the emotions. When we asked them to rate their emotions, as expected, there was no difference between waiting in line and not buying an electric car. So going back here to make it easier, waiting in line, not buying an electric car led to the same exact average emotions, 0.8. So from emotions, for the negative emotions, it was 5 negative emotions and 5 positive, and it was the exact same average. For the electric car, obviously they felt happier because they were doing the exception. And for breaking the line, it was negative. So, and this is what I needed to prove the difference in self-perception and emotions. For moral self-image, it wasn't quite the same. So I wasn't able to really prove the difference, because people felt moral standing in the queue. Maybe they associated the behavior of being in the queue as being moral, but I can see that breaking the line make them feel less moral than buying a conventional car. But what is interesting about the moral self-image is when I ran further analysis on the interaction effect. So I tested the interaction of empirical expectations. So the more I expect others to behave in a certain way on moral self-image across conditions. So to make it easier, if I'm waiting in line, even if I expect more people to wait in line, I'm feeling the same level of moral self-image. So it will not change. If I break the line, the more I expect people to wait in line, the more I will feel immoral breaking the line. And this is in line with our hypothesis. For electric car, the more I expect people to buy an electric car, I'm feeling even happier more moral happy buying an electric car. But the interesting part is the conventional car. So the more I expect people to buy an electric car, the more moral I feel not buying an electric car. So maybe because I feel like they've already doing their part of the of the environment issue, maybe I don't feel as immoral as when no one is really buying an electric car. And now we're interested in this effect, and in the next experiment trying to dissect more, why is this happening and how can we build on it. So now to prove more, to go down to the next level in the framework, is to test behavioral spillover. And this is what we're doing in the next study. We're trying to see, okay, now that we know that people do not feel the same behaving with the exception and the expectation, how does this translate into different spillovers? And the second behavior would be donating to a charity. And then we're going to focus on one context and try to see whether or not they will remain with positive behavior, or they consistent, or they will feel licensed not to do so. So, and here, if they did not conform to the expectation and they broke the line, let's say they will engage in one type of spillover called moral cleansing, where they will feel, okay, maybe I need to do something good, maybe donate to charity, maybe start, I don't know, recycling, helping others. So here I would maybe try to correct the negative behavior that I did. And this is where we can really take hold of what's happening on the second level. So this is basically what I wanted to share with you today. I'm excited maybe to show you the next study and what will happen with my research. And I'm interested to take this not only on pro-environmental and rule of law, but also on corruption. And my next paper would be testing this framework on negative behavior. So here assuming behaviors are positive, so expectation and exception is to do something good, but what about corruption when the expected behavior is negative? How do people perceive their actions when the social norm differs? So yeah, I'll leave the questions for you now, just to hear feedback. And thank you so much for listening and tuning in.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Fatima. Really, really interesting research. I'm sure everybody enjoyed your presentation, and the expectations. I think, obviously, as you say, there were parts of the research where we anticipated what the result would be, but then the expectations of others, that we mark them down lower. And I think that's maybe something that others are familiar with from other bits of research. And I think, as you say, that's extremely interesting, that you think other people's behavior is going to be different from yourselves. Very high and mighty of us. Very interesting at the outset when you were talking about your collecting the bills and how important national pride is. And again, that's really interesting to consider which countries that would be relevant for and other countries less relevant for. So very interesting, Fatima. I'm sure Prakash has comments to make, and then we'll take questions from the members. So Prakash, if you'd like to join us.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you so much, Fatima, for being here with us today. I also see a lot of new people in the chat, in the session today. Thank you all for joining us from different corners of the world. I'm assuming we have a lot of folks today from MENA, so that's lovely. Fatima, one question which I have in mind here, and let me try to phrase it properly. Yeah. So if you're working, let's say in India, right? Whether you're trying to plan for something, you're drawing up an intervention, or whether trying to measure the intervention post the execution. And this is not just for a behavioral science work, it could be anything in life in general, right? When things do not work out, or you have to explain away why something didn't happen. That something did not happen could be because it was not executed properly. It could be because you didn't plan for it. It could be any of it, right? There's a very common cultural trope that we have. And it comes from the fact that culturally, we as Indians, we believe that everything is predetermined. So in Hindi, you can say, honi ko kaun taal sakta hai, whatever ke sara sara, whatever is meant to be will be, right? Now, it doesn't mean that I as a person believe this, right? It doesn't mean every Indian believes this, But this is a collective memory or collective knowledge we have as Indians, which means if things don't work out, I can always, even if I don't believe, I can pull it out and I can throw and say, well, it was supposed to be, it was meant to be like that. And me throwing that line kind of removes my responsibility from the action, because if it is meant to be, how could I have influence in the first place, right? So are there, and I'm not asking you to talk about the entire reason, and that'll be dumb of me, because there are so many complexities in the entire region now there in Middle East. But are there quirks or cultural tropes or cultural mental models which exist, for you and in your culture, which makes it difficult to explain or work or execute? Are there stories you can share with us out here?
It's an interesting point, and it taps into the cultural psychology also, and how collective behavior are shaped, not individual behavior per se. And from behavioral science, we've learned that so many different biases are kind of they are applicable to different contexts and different cultures, because all of us are predictably irrational in some ways. But what you're talking about reminds me of something I read a few weeks back, on how a thought or an idea could become reality to us. So the more we tell ourselves a story, the more it becomes a reality to us. So what you're talking about could be a specific, so now people are coming up with their own type of biases. There's so many different heuristics and biases, and then this could be very context or culture specific to maybe India, and maybe we could find it in different collective cultures as well. But what you're talking about is the easy way out, so maybe also very close to hindsight bias. So I give explanation or excuse to the results, rather than really going back and saying what went wrong and what did not happen in the first place. I think some of the tools would be to de-bias here, not to nudge. So some of the tools we've learned is not always to behaviorally intervene and try to change the context. Sometimes sitting with you and tackling your system too, and de-bias you from your own bias, could be one very interesting tool. And we tried it when we were, when I was working with groups and trying to make different decisions. We used to sit with them and try to de-bias them from their confirmation bias, sometimes from loss aversion bias. And by you just realizing or becoming conscious of your own bias, maybe could also reduce its effect. And when you go back and try to see what went wrong and be more realistic in terms of what took place. Yeah. But it's an interesting point, and I'm sure we can find it in different other cultures.
Well, thank you, Fatima. There are a lot of questions out there from the audience.
Yeah, I'm not reading the chat. Also, it's good that you're recording, so I can go back and really.
Yeah. So,
do you want me? Yeah.
I think Louis is going to help us moderate with the Q&A.
Okay.
One more question, and this is tied down again, culture specific. There is a side project that we have been working on, a couple of us out here, and Priyanka, Hamza, and a couple of folks are leading this project out there, which is trying to make behavioral science more accessible in a culturally, in a cultural context. So if we look at all the theories, all the names of the biases, they are very much English: loss aversion, interstate empathy gap, So, but if I have to speak, okay, as long as I'm speaking in English, right, and explaining it to people, it's easy for them to kind of get. It takes some explaining, but it is still easier to kind of get it. But the question is, how do you translate this knowledge into multiple language, for example, Spanish or Portuguese or Hindi or Arabic, right? So one of the curiosities that we have is, when you are working, right, are you using English as a language to talk about behavioral science or intervention and why something would work but something else would not? Or are we doing a translation, equivalent translation into standard Arabic? This is number one. And second is just a general request for people who are out here who know Arabic very well. please feel free to ping Priyanka, me, or Hamza in the group. We really need a lot of help, from an Arabic context out here. Hamza is leading that effort. He's the lead out there. Please feel free to contact him. But Fatima, your answer out there. How do you deal with this language gap? Is it even a gap at all?
So it's also a nice challenge, and I think it's a good challenge to have. So at some point when the whole like, even I remember when the nudge term started to really come very famous, and everyone would use nudge. How can we translate it into Arabic? We had really different terms, and there was no term that could really define it, because by nudge we're not changing behavior, we're just steering people into the right direction, and we're not forcing any choice. And I remember a lot of discussions took place whether or not which word we need to use. So I can hear the challenge, and for me and personally, when I was working in Kuwait, we used to use English, and English was a common, like in the ministry, was a good language at UNDP, it's fine. And then even when you're explaining the term, if you're giving the presentation in Arabic, what's nice about behavioral science, okay, these are very technical terms, loss aversion, confirmation bias, and sign bias, and then might look very hard. But what I like about this field is that very intuitive, right? So I can explain it sometimes to my 7-year-old son, because I can explain it in a very easy way, and it taps into each one of us. So what I usually do if I don't have an English speaker in front of me and I want to convey the presentation and I want to convey these technical terms, I would just forget about the name of the bias and just go ahead and explain the actual term and what's happening, like loss aversion. If I give you $100 today or one, so it's easy to explain it in a very easy terminology. Yesterday I was reading something on BIT, and if you see their job descriptions and the way they write the requirements, just go today and see how they write the minimum qualifications for a job ad. They write it in a very simple way. They don't say you need quantitative analysis and statistical. They say, do you know how to differentiate causation from a correlation? So if the number of ice cream increase and number of sunglasses, it doesn't mean one is causing the other. It means it is. So it's go out there and look how they explain the terms, and you would find that it's very intuitive. And funny enough, before me coming and presenting here, friends of mine were like, we didn't really understand the name of your topic. And one of the things I've been trying to tell myself is my topic too easy to understand, because what I'm trying to say is expectation versus exception. So it might sound like a big word, but I believe behavioral science is very intuitive, and you will find a way to explain it if it's not in English in your own home country examples. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I use English, and whenever I can, I use Arabic, and I convey the message in a similar way.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Fatima. In India, there is this one magical concept in good part of the country. It's called Vashikaran. It means, a lot of people for like centuries have been trying to master that. Vashikaran, Vash means to control someone. So Vashikaran is a power. It could be a chant, an amulet, something, right? And if I get that, I could make people do what I want. So if you have lover issues, if you have money issues, mother-in-law issues, right? Boss issues, anything, your kid does not behave, your husband is an alcoholic. If you know the charm, you can control and you can change the person. So obviously you can then understand how holy men or men who claim that they're holy and they know this thing, they get a following because they offer these charms to you, right? So in one unfortunate discussion, when we're trying to switch to a local language to explain behavioral science, the understanding of the folks out there went towards Vashikaran. Oh, so is it like Vashikaran? It's like, no, it's not that. But it's always lovely to understand it from different cultural perspectives. Louise, please, help us with the Q&A moderation now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Prakash, before you chant your charm over all of us. Now, Mata has a technical question. Maybe I'll read his question, and if there is further about it that is wanted to know, could you share more information, Fatima, about the research design and data collection. So it's a little bit more detailed than just the description I think we had of the numbers and the nationality.
Yeah. So basically what I did, I used, as I said, MTurk to collect the data. I used Qualtrics to design the experiment. I did an online experiment for now just to prove the concept. I collected, I wanted to start with the UK, and I thought these two behaviors are applicable in the UK. But then when I started running the experiment, I didn't choose one context. I wanted just to see whether on how applicable is this framework. And for the sample size, I used a 0.3 effect size, and I ran statistical sample size on G-power and it was 100 participants per condition, and I had 4 conditions. For the design of the experiment itself, as I said, it's on Qualtrics, and I started with social expectations, and I measured social expectation using Christina Becchiari's book on design and diagnosing norms. So I really was trying to elicit their social expectations from different perspectives, their personal normative belief, their empirical and normative expectation. And then the randomization took place on Qualtrics to different groups. I also asked them demographic questions about their employment, their university level, where they're coming from, where are they resident, not only their nationality, but also because social norm is affected by the context where they come from. So all these types of data collected, and the research data or the analysis was done on Stata for now. And what I did is I tried to use social expectation as a moderator. So not only looked at the effect of the condition on the outcome variables. So I had moral self-image and emotions as independent variables, but also I wanted to look at social expectations. So the first part of the research design, their moderator effect, the moderation effect on conforming versus not conforming on the independent variable. And I believe that this interaction analysis informed me more into how to go about the second round of experiment. Yeah, and I can share more info if anyone is, so I can share my email and they can email me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Fatima. Very thorough indeed. And I wonder, Shankar, you had a question, but I wonder if that actually answers your question. Would you like to join us and ask more in relation to your question? Oh, and Mata did, sorry, just before I go to Shankar, Mata, do join us if there's more you'd like to ask as well. Hi, Shankar.
Yes. Thank you for the explanation of the methodology. I appreciate it. And great presentation. I do have I have another follow-up question on the design. So it was a survey based, and so my follow-up is: do you have any concerns in terms of how people answer these questions versus how they may actually behave in reality? The difference between, specifically because a lot of the topics that you research have a social desirability and other relevant aspects linked to them. And then also you mentioned something, you said you designed it to prove your hypothesis. So that kind of intrigued me, only because I have a research background, because usually we design experiments to disprove, not to prove, to disprove the hypothesis. So if you can kind of explain a little bit about that, but I don't want to take too much of time of this discussion on these details. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for the first part, yeah, I designed it on Qualtrics and randomized them into different conditions. And for the limitation, I would see that this is a hypothetical. So I'm not measuring real behavior. So I'm measuring hypothetical behavior, and this is why the first study was just to prove the concept and prove the framework. So eventually the subsequent paper, I would be looking at actual behavior, so giving them maybe a task to do and measure that. But the reason I did this is that I just wanted first to see whether or not this would work. And the second part is because I randomized them and I gave them the social expectation questions at the beginning, then they were literally no difference, especially among the same conditions. So buying an electric car, imagine buying, imagine not buying. So the only, because it's an RCT then the only difference would be based on the treatment effect that I gave them, which is to imagine themselves doing this or not doing this. For the second part of the question, I know from a statistical perspective, null hypothesis is that there's no difference between the two treatments, but by hypothesis, I meant my research hypothesis. So that this would that the social expectation will moderate the effect of conforming versus not conforming on emotions. So emotions will increase more under engaging in the exception versus conforming to the expectation. So this is my hypothesis. And of course, in statistics, my null hypothesis is that there was no difference between them. And I was able to reject it based on in some conditions, it was based on a 95% significance level, so less than 1% alpha. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Veta. Very, very technical for a Saturday afternoon, but stimulating, stimulating nonetheless. So Shankar, for a second time, would you like to join us with your question?
Yeah, so my question kind of relates to, I guess it could be termed as methodology as well. It's like, how much did you take into account how much people associate, like their social peer group, and how that was important in their expectations? So for example, you might have a social peer group that is quite environmentalist, or you might have one that doesn't pay much attention to environmental impact. Yeah. Specifically, like I'm interested in, because obviously around the world, we're all from around the world, and we have different kinds of ways that society slices it up into social peer groups. In Europe and in the UK, it's very different from in India, for example. So what are the peculiarities of the Middle East in terms of that?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the Middle East. I didn't run any experiments yet on my framework on the Middle East yet, because it's just a second stage thing. I'm Turk and prolific do not have in the Middle East, so it's the next stage. So for now, as I said, it was mainly India, the US, and some European countries. For the environmental behavior, and it's a very interesting question, and this was done in the social expectations. So there were 4 questions. One of them is about their personal normative beliefs. So how much they believe that environment and buying an electric car is the right thing to do, how much they approve it. So the higher they answered on this, the more I consider them that they have the personal norm of behaving in an environmental way. And the second expectation is the normative expectation. It's a second order personal normative belief. So I asked them about their expectation of what other people approve of. So this is exactly what you're mentioning about the social peer. So how much I expect my social network to approve of this, or to believe that buying an electric car is the right thing to do. And here you can find the difference. So they don't expect that their social network will approve of the electric car. They would approve more of the queue. And when I run the interaction analysis, I take this I take it as a covariate. So I try to see if they expect more other people to be pro-environmental behavior, how much it's affecting the way they perceive their action. Yeah. And then eventually in the behavioral spillover, this is a very interesting question, because in the behavioral spillover, my hypothesis would be that people that have high personal normative belief that are pro-environmental people, they will have consistent behavior. So they will tend to have consistency in their second behavior. So they will behave in a pro-environmental way. And those that score low on personal normative belief will maybe transgress. Maybe they're doing it out of warm glow effect, social desirability, but they will have more licensing to behave in a negative way afterwards. So this would be a main factor for me to see whether or not it will be consistent or not.
Okay. And there was no, because there's a counter effect, isn't there? The famous example being of students wearing a competing university's football shirt being dishonest made people more honest. So was there any of that effect that showed up?
No, for this sample that I currently have, it didn't. But so the next study I'm planning to do is to focus on one context, and this would give me a better idea and better social network effect, right? Because it would be more specific. And I'm planning to do it now for the UK and see how I'm going to replicate it and add a second behavior. So I'm going to ask them to donate to a charity and see how the behavioral spillover of that.
Okay, and just very quickly, aside from the research, I'm interested in your personal observations about how the Middle East might vary in terms of how the social peer group formulation works as compared to other cultures. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think I'm particularly interested in this. So what I'm trying to do in my PhD is to compare different contexts. So I want to compare basically individualistic versus collective cultures. And I believe that when it comes to collective behaviors and behaviors that cooperative, I think individualistic cultures do better because they have maybe the freedom, they're not maybe very socially affected by their social norm. But when we move more and more to collective cultures, we find that these collective behaviors that need cooperation, they become less and less and less obvious, right? So I've read some papers in the literature that prove that, but I'm interested to look at it from the perspective of my research, yes.
Fascinating.
And I'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shankar, for your great question. And there's a question here from Hare, and unable to join due to, I think, noise in the background. So I'll read the question. The question is that I think the social pressure that I feel from breaking a line is slightly different than the social pressure I'd feel from buying a regular car. Could you explain the different results you're getting? I'm assuming most of the study sample never really bought an electric car, and I wonder if this could bias their answers, I suppose, as opposed to an action that they are familiar with.
Yes, and this is also part of the, like I said, because this is the first study and I'm using a hypothetical behavior and I'm doing an online experiment. So eventually I'll be looking more at real behavior. But to start with, I wanted, and then the first part of the question, that they were very different. And that's basically why I chose these two behaviors. So I really wanted two behaviors that are spread on the spectrum. So one with very high social expectation and one with very low social expectations. And I wanted to compare this. I can see that standing in the queue is different than electric car. And this is what I'm trying to prove, that breaking the line does not make you feel as bad, makes you feel more bad than not buying an electric car. And this is the point I'm trying to make. But this is just a small example. And then later I will move to real core behaviors and core policy challenges, like, for example, corruption. If I go to a country where corruption is the norm, then I'm less likely to feel bad if I accept a bribery. And guess what? If I don't accept a bribery, I might feel good about myself. So this is where it starts to get interesting. But in order for me to first try to prove the concept, I needed to, so I was thinking, if I'm in the UK, and what could be two real behaviors that are like on the both extremes of the spectrum. I only thought of an electric car as an environment because people sometimes they do recycle, they don't recycle, so it's a gray area. I wanted somewhere where I get 70% people stand in the queue and 25% really buy an electric car, and how this would impact how they feel about themselves. So yeah.
The potential for the development, as you say, is really fascinating. We're just going to take one last question now from Tony. So if you'd like to join us, Tony.
Absolutely. I actually had a couple of questions or an observation and a question. Which one did you want from me, Louise?
Whichever you feel like asking, Tony.
Well, you know, I'm a salesperson, and so or as I like to say, a practical psychologist. You know, somebody who uses psychology to their own benefit, and so you know, selling to groups to me has always been easier than selling to an individual, because if you can tap into what their norms are, like a family group, you know, and you put some things out there, and they'll latch on to certain things. And then they'll start to nod, and then you know that you've got the right things, and then you pick out who kind of the leader is of the group. And then if they start to nod, then everybody will start to nod. And before you know it, it's like a snowball happening. And so I'm always been fascinated by the whole idea of social norms. And you know, and how those are maintained. I don't know if there's a question. I don't know if there's a question in here, but there's like a real spectrum all the way from, you know, don't spit on the sidewalk to cults where, you know, you can kind of get sucked into a cult, but then the social norm keeps you there. And so how people are making decisions in a context. Anyway, I'm absolutely fascinated.
I'm gonna tell you one interesting thing about social norm if you're interested in them, and maybe you could just continue the discussion that you're saying. When I've been reading, I've read like for 6 months just on social norm, trying to understand how to measure them and how to diagnose them. And one really interesting thing that I found is that not every common behavior or a descriptive, if you want, norm. So like 90% of people wear umbrellas when it's raining. This is not a social norm. And I'm particularly taking how Fatima Koaik defines social norm, because I'm not doing it because other people are doing it. I'm doing it because it fits my own interest, right? So when I behave in a way independently from social expectation, then it is not a social norm. It's just, I would still wear an umbrella even if no one is wearing an umbrella when it's raining, right? So this is what, if you're looking at a group of people and you can see, if you like everyone is nodding, it means that they're just, this particular behavior that you're selling is really interdependent. We call it not independent. So that's why a custom, a moral conviction, religion, it's not a social norm. I'm gonna do it regardless of what others are doing. So whenever you're maybe selling, you're saying you use psychology for your like private company, or you're selling, just try to see if the behavior is really, they will do it independently of what others are doing. If not, social norm is not your route. You have to just use another type of, I don't know.
Well, maybe I'm using the wrong term, because I sort of had an epiphany once. I was at a fast food place, and a church group came in, you know, from a church, and you know, they were having fun and they were doing their thing, ordering their food in line. And I just realized, you know, here we are in the United States, these are all Christians, right? And so, but if we were somewhere else, you know, they could be Hindus, or they could be Muslim, you know, that their being Christian was a product of their environment. If they'd been in a different environment, they would have been something else, even though their behavior might have been the same. So is a social norm different than, you know, sort of growing up in one culture versus, and I'm not sure where that question goes, but
yeah, this is like here it's a question of, if we go to religion, the question of whether or not I'm practicing my religious belief because other people are doing it. Like, I go to this place, I wear a veil because everybody is wearing a veil, or I'm gonna wear a veil regardless of what other people are doing. If they're doing it, so what you're saying is like going back one step and saying, am I Muslim because I was born here? So obviously this is just maybe more philosophical questions to answer, but if you want like a practical overview, am I practicing now my religious practices because of what other people are doing and I expect them to expect me to do it, or I'm doing it just regardless because I believe it's the right thing to do? So if I go to the US and no one is practicing what I'm doing, I will still do it, then it's not a social norm. But whether or not I started practicing because of social norms.
Okay. I get it.
But for you, I think for you, you don't need to go that route. For you, whenever you take a group of people that you're presenting to or you're selling your product to, you just need to understand whether or not they're doing the behavior based on independent or interdependent choice. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that.
It's fascinating to hear the machinations of your mind as you come towards your questions. So we're coming towards the end of today's session, and I'm sure Fatima would endorse that if you have other questions about the work that she's doing, we've got a thread going in the group. I'm sure if you put your questions there, Fatima will respond to them. So it just remains me to say thank you so much for joining us today, Fatima. It's been so interesting to be privy to the work, the research that you're doing at the moment. I'm sure everybody's enjoyed hearing about it, and I'll just hand back now to Prakash to close the event. Thanks so much, Fatima.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. For those who have been inspired by Fatima's talk today and want to delve a little bit more into the world of social norms, it's a fantastic world. I've shared a link out there. It's a Coursera program by Christina Bicchieri. It might seem a little overwhelming in the beginning because she is very, very fastidious about the definitions she used. The way Fatima was explaining interdependent versus independent. If I carry an umbrella, is it because others are carrying or because I want to, my relation, right? And almost 40-50% of the course is very strict that way. But once Christina is confident that she was able to explain the concepts to you and you really got it, from there, the program is amazing. So please check out norms. And she has 2 cores, norms and change. And it's a fascinating field in itself, number 1. Number 2, people from the Behavioural Science Club, you know the year is coming to an end. We have around 10 weeks remaining. So what we always try to do out here is, as opposed to starting a New Year resolution, which God knows when is it going to end, because of an entire year, we always try to end the New Year on our term, because that is much more finite. You have only 10 weeks. So it's much more easier for us to say, you know what, I'm going to do this for only 8-10 weeks. So please join us in. We are trying to get a couple of things done. Some of us will try to start running. Some of us will try to shed off 1 kilo or 2 or 5 kilo, 4 kilos. Some of us got books lined up in our shelves. We have to finish them. Some of us are aspiring writers. Please work on your drafts. Whatever it is, feel free to work on it. Pick up a new language or guitar. It's nice to do it as a group, because it's fun and you can share and maybe put some pressure on yourself, or maybe just share your streaks. And I have done it this week also. Let's do that, please. It'll be fun as a group. And Fatima, thank you so much for being here with us. It was a lovely experience here, listening to your work. And it's almost a year, I think, for more than 15 months, I've been trying to get you to be a part of either Behavioral Science Club or the Now Fest. And so feel very lucky to be able to.
Finally happened. Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before you go, is there anything that you want to share with us, or advice, or in general, anything that you want to leave us with, Fatima?
No, I'm happy. I was happy to be on this call. Please email. I'll send you my email. Maybe you could perhaps send them my email so they can feel free to share me their feedback and questions. We'll be improving my research and improving the next experiment I'll be doing. And for sure, I'll stay in touch. And thank you for having me today. And if you need anything in the region on behavioral insights, nudging, please reach out.
I think we will. Thank you so much, Louise. You want to tell everyone about our upcoming guests?
Yes, I would, if I had any note for myself. I've completely forgotten who's next week. So
all right, our guest for next week is Sandra and Shalin Gupta. The book is called The Power of Trust. I think it's gonna be a fantastic session too. Everyone, please stay safe. Wear your mask, take your shots. Have fun, be good. Take care.
Thanks everybody
Bye.
for joining us. I'll blame the knock on my head for my temporary memory loss. See you all next week. Thanks very much. Bye now.
Bye, Prakash. Bye, Louise.